Chapter 5 of The Heads of Cerberus by Francis Stevens. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5 The Weaver of the Years. When the marvelous oversteps the bounds of known possibility, there are three ways of meeting it. Trenmore and his sister, after a grave discussion of certain contingencies connected with the Catholic religion and a dismissal of them on grounds too utterly Celtic and dogmatic for Drayton to follow, took the first way. From that time on, they faced every wonder as a fact by itself, to be accepted as such and let go at that. Drayton, though all his life he had unconsciously so viewed such accustomed marvels as electricity or the phenomenon of his own life, could not here follow his Irish friends. He compromised on the second way, and accepted with a mental reservation, as I see you now, but I am not at all sure that you are there or that I really believe in you. Fortunately, there was not one of the three so lacking in mental elasticity as to discover the third way, which is madness. And what we should be thinking of, declared Viola presently, is not how did we come here, but how are we to find our way home? This was a truism too obvious for dispute, and yet, to Drayton at least, it seemed that no amount of thinking or action either was likely to be of great service. Without food or water they stood, without weapons or compass, without the faintest glimmering of knowledge as to their actual geographic position upon the earth. Drayton strained his eyes toward the hills, already purpling to the sun's last rays. What hope was there among those desolate heights, more than was offered by the empty flatness of the plain? How many miles could be traversed by this frail-looking little sister of Trenmore's before those dainty, high-heeled boots of hers were worn to rags? Before she dropped exhausted? How many more miles could he and Trenmore carry her if they found neither food nor water? "We'll find food as we go," said Terence, as if interpreting and answering the thought. "I never did see a green country like this, and no sort of food in it. Viola, 'tis a plucky lass you've always been. I've often promised that some day you'd go wandering with me. Let's be starting. And, Bobby lad, don't look so downhearted. There's a way out of everything. And aren't we just the three ones to find it, wherever we are?" Drayton realized that his gloomy countenance must be anything but encouraging to Viola. Determined that henceforth he would be a model adventurer at any cost, he smiled. "I wasn't really worrying, old man. I was merely thinking—" But what innocent fabrication he would have devised to account for this despondency they never discovered. His sentence ended abruptly, and the forced smile vanished. The attention of all three had been caught by a strange, deep, moaning sound. Reaching for his sister, Trenmore drew her close to his side. They all stood very still and listening. The moaning, which began at first faintly and in a low key, seemed to emanate from a source immediately beneath their feet. Swiftly, however, this source widened and spread outward, extending itself beneath the empty plain and under the hills toward the mountain peaks. As it spread, the note rose in key and in volume until it was more than anything else like the sound which might be thrown out by an immense top, whirling with planetary speed. The intense vibration became agonizing. The listeners clapped their hands over their ears in a vain effort to shut it out. Drayton, for his part, felt that in one instant either his eardrums or his brain must give way. Even as he thought it, however, the last segment of the sun's red periphery sank out of sight beneath the horizon. The terrible humming died away, melting into the universal silence in which it had found birth. With scarcely an intervening moment of twilight, night swept down. At first, it seemed absolute as blindness, or the end of all created things. Then, as his pupils expanded, Drayton began dimly to perceive his companions, while, on looking upward, he beheld a sky powdered thick with clear, brilliant stars. He drew a long breath, and heard it echoed by the others. "They have a strange nightfall in this land," muttered Trenmore. "And they do make a great noise over it." "Yes," replied Drayton, the observant, "but those stars look familiar enough." "Right as usual, Bobby. It's the same old stars they're using. Look, Viola, there's the old bear and her cub." "And the Milky Way," said Viola. Somehow, in spite of all that had occurred, the sight of those familiar stars and constellations brought a feeling of almost security, of at-homeness in actuality.
"Your talk of purgatory," laughed Drayton, "and that abominable noise just now sent a few unearthly shivers down my back. Those stars tell a different story. We are surely somewhere on Earth. Different longitude, perhaps, but in our own latitude, or nearly, even though night did shut down with such tropical suddenness. If we were in the tropics, we should see a sky different from this."
His astronomical observations were cut short by a low cry from Viola. Dimly he glimpsed her arm, stiffly outstretched and pointing. "And if this is our own Earth," she cried, "is that our moon? And if it is, what is the moon doing over there? Will you tell me that?" There was pertinence in her question. From the exact point where the sun had descended 5 minutes earlier, the silver rim of a great white moon was rising. Already the wide plain before it was invaded and dimly illuminated by the flood of its elfin radiance. It was as if, when the sun went down, the moon had been waiting there, and had now slipped past to take its place in the sky.
"Surely a very singular moonrise in the west," murmured the ex-lawyer.
Inwardly he was more shocked by this apparent misplacement of the lunar orb than by anything which had yet occurred. If the stars had reassured him, surely the moon had been prompt to undo their work.
"Is that thing a rock or an animal?"
Again it was Viola who spoke, and again her companion stared where the girl was pointing. 15 feet to the right of them was a large, dark object. It lay half in the black shadow of the ruined arch, half in the steadily increasing moonlight.
"That is only a part of the old gateway,"
began Drayton in a quiet, reassuring tone. Even as he spoke, however, the dark thing seemed to rear itself slightly from the ground. Trenmore made a quick movement, but Viola caught his arm.
Don't go near it, Terry. It may be some savage wild beast that's been hiding there."
"And d'ye think I fear it then?" growled Trenmore.
"Don't be a fool, Trenmore."
Drayton spoke with a brusqueness born of mingled horror and amazement. That uncanny, half-glimpsed thing now appeared to be stretching itself upward, higher and higher in the partial shadow, where it stood.
"Think of your sister," he cried, "and help me get her away from this unspeakable place before it's too late. Look there at that wall."
The wall he referred to was the same behind which he had first come upon Trenmore. Before their incredulous eyes it seemed to come to life, to rise, and to grow upward.
"They're alive, these stones! They're alive!"
cried Viola. Trenmore held back no longer. Here was something with which even his great strength was not fit to contend. All about them the fallen rocks, the walls, the very flagstones beneath their feet were heaving, moving, and the motion seemed all the more sinister and terrible because of the silence which attended it. Drayton reached desperately for Viola's arm or hand, but Terry simply plucked her from the ground as one gathers up a child and began running across the court in great leaps and bounds. In one spring he had cleared the nearest wall and run down on the hill. Drayton followed at a speed nearly as great, and only caught up with the Irishman at the foot of the hill, where they both paused as by one impulse to look back. During his flight, Drayton had been filled with a ghastly, unnatural terror. He had feared that the ruins were coming after him, lichenous, soil-encrusted, horribly animate. But now, looking back, that fear at last was vanished. The bare hillside, almost white in the moonlight, was crowned still by its broken walls. But were they broken now?
"By heaven, it's like
a mirage," supplied Viola, who seemed suddenly to have achieved a curious composure.
"Put me down, Terry. No, put me down, I say. I wish to see better. Yes, it's growing fast. In a few minutes we shall see the whole castle as it used to be." Her calm assurance struck Drayton as odd, but only for a moment. After all, why shouldn't a castle grow up like a flower with a magic scent? Down here on the plain the grass was filled with flowers and the air with their fragrance. There was something peculiarly soothing and reassuring in the very odor of them. Drayton no longer felt the least alarm, hardly even wonder. Not though a miracle was occurring on the hilltop above.
Rising, ever rising in the white moonlight, the old fortress, which they had deemed fallen forever, was rebuilding itself. Up, up shot the walls, battlemented now and perfect. Behind them, tower on tower, pinnacle upon pinnacle, lifted into the clear silvern radiance as the white foam of a rising wave might lifted and frozen into perfect form, till the vision or mirage or miracle, whatever this marvel might be named, was consummate and growth ceased. Here and there a pennant fluttered in the faint night breeze. From the highest tower of all, a great standard drooped, too heavy for so small a wind to raise. And now it could be seen that close to where they stood a narrow white road led upward from plain to castle, ending at a huge gateway immediately above them. Suddenly the heavy iron-studded doors of this gateway opened inward, and swung slowly back. Beyond them was all darkness. Then came the first sound from the ghost castle, a heavy stamping, a clash and jingle as of metal. Out of the inner darkness a great horse strode into the moonlight. Upon its back sat a gleaming, erect, armed figure. 5 more riders followed. Then the gates slowly, silently shut themselves. The company of 6 came riding down the pale roadway. Drayton, for his part, felt arising within him a vast curiosity, a curiosity so great that he actually left his companions and walked over to the roadside. He had advanced with the deliberate intention of questioning those mysterious riders. As they drew near, however, he turned and strode quickly back to Trenmore and his sister.
"What is the matter?" queried Viola. "Why didn't you ask them who they are in the name of the castle?"
Drayton's reply was voiced in a tense, fierce whisper.
"Look at them! Only look at them, I tell you!"
His tone seemed to rouse his friends from the strange apathy into which they had all more or less fallen since setting foot on the plain. They stood no more than 8 or 9 yards from the road, and could see very well what Drayton had already perceived. The horses were large, heavy brutes, of the type bred centuries ago for battle. They were spirited in a clumsy sort of way, and came curvetting and prancing down the road. But the men on their backs, why, those were not men, not even the ghosts of men. They were mere empty shells of gleaming armor. The visors of all 6 were raised, and the watchers could see how the moonlight shimmered inside the helmets. The armor sat erect, 6 proud plumed figures of chivalry, and the joints rattled with a hollow clashing. They were past, and the white moonlight of the plain had swallowed them up. They had melted into it as a ship melts into the sea fog. Glancing upward, Drayton half expected to see the castle itself dissolve and fade as it had grown, but no such phenomenon occurred. There it stood, massive, solid, dominating the hill. With a slight shudder, Drayton turned to his companions.
"Somehow," he said, "I don't fancy the idea of asking hospitality at that gate."
"'Twould be madness," ejaculated Trenmore. "It's fortunate we were to escape from that spook house before the walls grew too high."
"Yes," conceded his friend simply.
"And what should we be doing now, do you think? Shall we stay here till the sun rise again, or shall we go on?"
It really made very little difference what they did, thought Drayton. Already that pleasant lassitude, from which sight of the riding armor had momentarily shocked him, was returning. By a volition which hardly seemed their own, however, the 3 of them presently found themselves advancing across the wire-green plain. On the hill the grass had been dry, dead stuff, parched as from long drought. The plain, however, was like a sweet, well-watered meadow. A scent came up from it that told of flowers crushed beneath their feet and growing everywhere in the midst of that lush greenness. They were pale, small flowers, and very fragrant. Viola plucked a few. So delicate were the blossoms that they withered instantly in her hands. The 3 walked slowly, for the night had brought warmth rather than coolness. The sweet air breathed soft and languid. Now and then one of them would glance back over his shoulder. The phantom castle remained on the hilltop, as real in appearance as anything looks by moonlight, which casts a veil over all that is not very near. Now everyone knows that moonshine is at best of an uncertain and bewildering quality. Yet it seemed odd, or would have seemed so had they not been past surprise, that in the beginning they had deemed the plain deserted and bare of any moving thing since the empty armor had ridden outward and vanished. For now, as they walked, they perceived that all about them were forms and groups of forms, moving over and through the sweet, sprinkled grass in a weird and noiseless dance, without music or apparent rhythm. Presently they had blundered fairly into the midst of a group of these shapes, which seemed indeed to form about them from the misty light itself or rise up from the ground. They were queer, bulky, clumsy-shouldered figures, dressed in tight-fitting clothes and hoods and gloves of smooth fur. At least so appeared those directly ahead, black silhouettes against the moon. On looking around, however, the travelers were somewhat startled to find that what they had taken for hooded faces were not faces at all, but just smooth, featureless expanses of fur. The back and the front of the heads were exactly alike, save for one straight, black gash where the mouth might be. Joining hands, the creatures began to circle with a clumsy dancing motion. The wanderers, caught in the center of their ring, could proceed no further without using force to break it. Soon the swift, whirring dance began to make Drayton dizzy. Round and round and round. And now, over the plain, he perceived that there were many other circles like this. They all swung round and round and round. Why had he thought the dance silent? There was music enough, and everywhere the beat of uncounted feet in perfect rhythm with a melody that filled the world. It rose from the scented grass between the beating feet. It flowed from the moon with the sorcery of her light. It circled and circled in rhythmic rings. It caught his feet in a silver snare. He was swept into the net of a great and passionate desire to dance and dance forever, now. Before him, Drayton saw the circle break apart, and there was just the space for one to join them, to become a link in the mystic ring and satisfy the calling melody. Almost without his will, Drayton's feet obeyed the call. His hand caught that of the monster nearest him. He remembered afterward that it felt neither cold nor warm, but rather like a fur glove stuffed with wool. Another hand caught him violently by the shoulder and wrenched him backward. Drayton cried out and struggled to escape, but Trenmore had him fairly in the grip of his mighty arms. Even as the two strove together, all that moonlight madness of sound jarred, broke, and from discord died to silence. The strength went out of Drayton's body. He leaned, weak and panting for breath, against the Irishman's shoulder.
"If you're so fond of dancing,"
said the latter grimly,
"you might at least choose Viola or me for a partner. Are you mad, Bobby, to take hands with those?"
Before Drayton could reply, the circle of dancers stopped short in their tracks. Each ungainly figure made a strange, wild gesture as of wrath or despair. Then they separated, scattered, and went dancing wildly away across the grass. Hiss! It was a long-drawn, sibilant sound, and it seemed to come from the little pile of rocks close by. In its black shadow they saw two spark-like eyes gleam redly. Hiss! Touch not the dancers. Go not near them. Speak not to them.
Strange things be abroad, and stranger things be done in the white moonlight of Ulithia.
Go not near.
"And who and what may you be?"
demanded Trenmore, bending down, but the spark-like eyes had vanished. An instant later they reappeared, gleaming dimly through the white cobweb between two tall tufts of grass. Hiss! Again that snake-like hissing. Beware! You have escaped the everlasting dance. Beware the weaver and her song.
"But what are you?" demanded Trenmore, again rather wildly.
The red sparks flashed and faded from behind the silver web. Only a dim voice trailed back to them. I am the voice of warning in a land of illusion. Beware! Drayton, somewhat recovered from his own queer experience, moved as if to follow. Again Trenmore checked him.
"We'd best not traffic with that thing either," he recommended gruffly. "We've no place in this world we've got into, no place at all. And the very best we can do is keep our own company till we find a way out of it."
What was it the thing said?
queried Drayton as he fell into step again beside the other two.
Ulithia? That sounds some way familiar.
Trenmore shook his head.
Not to me. I've traveled many a land and read not a few books, old and new, but nowhere have I heard that name before.
Nor I, said Viola. Drayton was silent a moment, searching his memory. Then his face fell.
I recall the association now,
he observed discontentedly.
It's no help. There were some letters, the first letters of that name, carved on the ruins back there. I read them while the ruins were still ruins.
For a while they walked on in silence. With the breaking of that one ring of dancing forms, the plain seemed to have gradually cleared, so that they were once again alone with the moonlight and each other. Alone until, long before they saw the White Weaver, they heard her singing. That was a wondrous, murmurous, liquid song of hers, like shallow summer brooks and rustling fields. They were not surprised to come upon her at last, seated in the moon-frosted glass, tossing a weaver's shuttle between her outstretched hands. They could see neither loom nor thread nor web, however, save 1,000 silver cobwebs on the grass. All the plain was agleam with them. This is the song she was singing, or as much of it as any of them could afterward recall. The web lies broad in the weaving room. Fly, little shuttle, fly. The air is loud with the clashing loom. Fly, little shuttle, fly. Year on year I have woven here, green earth, white earth, and autumn sere, sitting, singing where the earth props mold. We vie, singing when the world grows old. Time's a traitor, but the loom is leal. Time's a liar, but the web is real. Hear my song and behold my web. Fly, little shuttle.
But, madam, 'tis no web you have there, broke in Trenmore. 'Tis naught but a little shuttle, and no thread to it at all.
At that the song ceased, and the woman raised her face. It was beautiful as the moon's self, though her hair was silver and her face without a trace of color. Her clear, pale eyes seemed to look through and far beyond them. "You are strangers," she said in a voice that might have come from very far away, clear and sweet as a silver bell. "Yet your lives, too, are in my web." "Aye, they are mine, bound up fast in my web that you see not. From here on go forward, go deeper. Heed not the mockings of the dancing shadow people. Heed not the voice of mine enemy, who would keep you forever bound in the shadows of Ulithia. Go forward, go deeper, go forward." With that she ceased speaking, and, taking up her song where she had left it, she made the empty shuttle fly like a living thing from hand to hand. Drayton eyed his companions doubtfully.
"If the lady would make her advice a little clearer, we might try to follow it. We have to go on somewhere, you know, Terry."
But Viola shook her head, staring at the weaver with hostile, questioning glance. "Have you so soon forgotten?" she said. "Beware the weaver and her song." At that the weaver again ceased singing. Her thin lips were curled in a smile, but her eyes were like pale blue ice. "Aye," she murmured. "Beware of the weaver, the white weaver of the years, beware. But your feet are set in her web. The door opens before you. There is no way out but on. And what is Ulithia, phantom borderland of life, to such as you? Go forward, go forward, go forward." Trenmore took one step toward her, with what intent he himself scarcely knew. But as he took it, Drayton laughed with a touch of weariness.
"You have frightened the lady away, Terry."
It was true. As Trenmore had stepped toward the White Weaver, that cold-eyed lady had vanished and taken her song and her shuttle with her. As the three again proceeded, Viola waved her hand in a wide gesture, indicating the plain they traversed. "Did either of you notice," she said,
that there were so many of these white spider webs about before we saw that woman?" Her brother and Drayton merely stared stupidly, heavy-eyed. "Before we met the White Weaver," murmured the girl dreamily, "there was only a web here and there, woven between the grass stems. Now it is like walking through a silver sea. And the moon! What moon of earth was ever like this of Ulithia?"
"If it is a moon," said Trenmore with no great interest, "she's taking an uncommon long time for her rising."
Blank as a silver shield, the moon, or what they had believed a moon, still rested at the edge of the plain, its lower part bisected by the horizon. More like an enormous archway than a moon, it seemed, a sort of celestial door, perhaps, in the edge of the sky. They neared and neared, walking across a silver sea of web through which the invisible flowers sent up their perpetually increasing incense. Almost too sweet now for pleasure. More and more like an arch the moon appeared, an immense, light-filled archway of the nearly circular Moorish type. About it they began to perceive a certain dim outline of dark substance, behind which the moon itself was just a depth and blinding expanse of light. Almost unconsciously they hastened their steps. At last, heads swimming with the fragrance of the plain, they had actually reached the splendid thing. High, high above them curved the perfect arch of stone, black as unpolished ebony set in what seemed a solid wall of similar rock stretching away to darkness on either hand. Through the opening they could not see, for it was filled with a brilliant mist of pure white light. "Look," said Drayton, leaning dizzily against the black stone to which he pointed. "Here on the architrave there are silver characters inlaid, aren't they? But they move and writhe like white flame." Closing his eyes against the glare, he wished that a great wind might arise, a great clean wind that would sweep away cobwebs and flowers altogether. "Go forward! Go deeper! Go forward!" murmured a sweet, clear voice. To Drayton it seemed to be Viola's, though with a distant sound like a far-off silver bell. "Your feet are in the web!" cried the voice. "In the web of the Weaver of Years. And why linger in the shallows of Ulithia? Go forward, go deeper." "Why linger?" echoed Drayton softly. His feet were in the shallows of a wide white sea that was carrying him outward, onward. End of chapter 5.